We are live now. Hello, friends. We are doing office hours today. Let me go to the office hours page. And also, I am going to share this URL live to the world. There we go. That has now been tweeted. And I don't need that up anymore. So let me share my screen really quick and explain what this is. Each week on Fridays, normally an hour from now, but I messed up scheduling, so I'm doing it a little early today. I answer people's questions on office hours. So you can read through this, go to kentcdons.com/office hours. Kind of explains what this is, but basically each week I have this Zoom call. You can join the Zoom call, or you can post in our Discord, and I will go through these questions for about an hour. I'm going to need to stop a little bit early because I have something at 9:30 my time. So yeah, I'll have to jump off a little early, but we do have a couple of questions. I'll go through these. I give preference to people who are actually in Zoom. And so if you want to make sure that your question is answered, then join the Zoom, but I typically get through all of the Discord questions too. Okay, with that said, anybody in Zoom have a question? Oh, unable to hear me. Ah, dang it. Okay, testing. Okay, there we go. That's better. Man, that's weird. I think it may be a problem on your end, because when I popped open the YouTube video, which by the way, I've got that right here. I'm pretty sure that was working. Yeah, it was working. Whew, close call. So yeah, sorry, Rupert, I think that was you. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so yeah, okay, good. So Rupert, do you have a question, or Vitalish? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. You can correct me. Either one of you have a question here in the Zoom?
No, I'm just spectating for today.
Okay, cool. Vitalish, did you have a question or a correction of how I pronounce your name?
That's Vitaly.
Vitaly, yeah. Okay.
Just that's only in Czech Republic or just in Czechia. You know, we have this Vitaly J at the end, but it's Vitaly, and I don't have any questions. So thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you do come up with a question while I'm answering these others, feel free to interrupt me because you're here, so you get priority. Okay, cool. So this is around where we left off. So Zud or Zude, not sure how to pronounce that either. Sorry. What are the best steps I can take to secure a React front end? Well, that's a little bit of a tricky question to answer, mostly because there's nothing about React that is inherently insecure, specifically like a React front end. And so then it becomes more of a question of like, okay, how do I secure a front end? Nothing specific to React. Well, one thing about React is that it helps you avoid cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, which basically is somebody enters in some text in like a free-form input, and then you're rendering that text out to some div or something. React helps avoid cross-site scripting. Well, so the vulnerability is somebody could put in like a script tag that loads any JavaScript, or they could just put any JavaScript that they want to like steal tokens and whatnot. Yeah, so React helps avoid that by when it renders any of your text, it will escape it for you. So you don't have to worry about anything like that, which is kind of nice. Unless you're using dangerously set inner HTML, which is why it's prefixed with dangerously, because you need to make sure you escape it yourself. Yeah, outside of that, like a lot of the things that we've been doing in JavaScript for authentication with like JOTs and storing JOTs in local storage are not exactly secure. And so, yeah, using Remix, for example, or just like a cookie-based authentication is you're typically better off that way. Oh yeah, it just occurred to me that last week people asked me to serve up 1080p. I don't know if this is 1080p. Yeah, I'm at 720. It looks like is the best that we have. Sorry. I just yeah, this is a Zoom limitation. It's the only way that I can have people like participate without it being like a big deal. But Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a distraction. So as far as securing the front end, yeah, there's not much. It's mostly like don't do a bunch of things, and I don't have any specific resources to point you to. Most of yeah, like I guess there are a couple of rules. So assume that anything that ends up in the user's browser they have access to, even if you like try to obfuscate it or hide it in memory or something like that. If it goes to the browser, users can see it. So don't send anything secret to the browser. Of course, you can send user-specific data to the browser, but only when you know that the user is authenticated. Yeah, make sure that you always do your validation on the server. You can give users a nice user experience with validation on the client, but you can't give them security with validation on the client. So yeah, make sure you do validation on the server. Remix can help you with that too. Yeah, it's pretty natural to do validation on the server when you're using Remix. Yeah, sorry, I don't have any specific resources for you. Good luck. Okay, I'll just mention, I noticed there are a couple of questions on here. I do not answer questions on YouTube. So if you want to ask a question, you do have to come to the Discord or join the Zoom. It's just way easier for me, and it also is it's just the way that I do it. So yeah, if you want to ask a question, you got to ask it here in the Discord or join the Zoom. Okay, Joe Emile is asking, I haven't read the whole thing, so one second. We work at work, we have old and heavy systems from the 1980s. Wowza, I was born in 88. So this is like when I was a baby, or maybe even before. Running in the core of the company infrastructure. API calls to these systems can take 30 seconds to respond, which is no surprise. As for now, this is something we have to live with. Makes sense. Bro, I'm sure there's nobody around who worked on those systems today, and nobody understands how they do what they do. And nobody wants to rewrite it, I'm sure. Another case is when you make a system calling a multitude of APIs to aggregate data, which may take a few seconds. These calls are, of course, cached as possible, but not non-cached calls can and will take quite some time to execute. Makes sense. As I'm having a talk at work about Remix next Friday, these are cases I guaranteed will be asked about how to handle with Remix. Have you guys, Ryan, Michael, or others discussed patterns or cases where Remix applications, depending on data from external systems that use several seconds to respond? My initial thought is that doing the fetch in the loader won't work, as it will stall returning anything at all, and instead fall back to fetching from the front end with spinners. Okay, yeah. So I got a bunch of thoughts on this. So let's see. You have to decide what's like, you have some constraints, and so now you need to decide what's the user experience that you want. So like Gatsby and Next would say, oh, you just SSG it and your builds will take a while, but your app won't take a long time. The problem is that you will have to do a rebuild anytime you want updated data. So if you're okay with the data being like a week old or something, then that's fine for SSG. But if you don't want to rebuild your system every single time, then every time you change data, then yeah, you're going to have the same problem with those systems as well. And still, if you are okay with it being a week old, then caching it is not a problem, because you just cache it for an extended period of time. And then when you pass the threshold, then you still serve the old cache value, and in the background, you go and update the cache value. This is a stale while revalidate sort of thing. So the stale while revalidate spec says that we are okay sending old data to users for X amount of time. And in the background, while we have reached that time where we need to go and update the value, we'll send the stale data, and in the background, we'll go and update it. And if it takes longer, if the stale value is longer than the time that we specify, then the user will not use the cache and they'll just have to wait. So you could implement something like that. That's what I do on my site, actually. Like all of this stuff, when you go to any of the blog posts all this data, how many people read this, is using my caching strategy. Same thing for this, same thing for the content. It's all using this idea of let's cache it for X amount of time. And as soon as a user shows up, we will always send them the cached version. And if it's past the time of, when I want it to no longer be cached, or when I want to update the cache, then in the background, I'll go update the cache, but we always send the cached version. I don't have quite the ability in my cache implementation yet to say, if it's past that time, then make the user wait, because I figure like I'd much rather send them something old than make them wait for about 5 seconds, maybe not 5 seconds, maybe like 2 seconds, but like we have to go hit the GitHub API and compile everything and stuff for lots of these. And so, so it can take a while, and like computing the total number and the rankings and everything can also take a while for these pages too. So yeah, that's why I cache all of that stuff. For your thing in particular, like 30 seconds is like ridiculous. And so you wouldn't want to have users wait that long, like ever. So what I would suggest is, and maybe this depends on how dynamic the data is and how many users you have. But like my first thought is you just have your cache and you have it regularly updating, just like at a frequency that makes sense to you. Just have a server that's responsible for hitting that backend again and updating it on a regular interval. What I'm doing is I'm not doing a regular interval. I'm doing when a user requests it, then update the cache. And so like that means that my cache update is a function of how popular the blog post is. And that ends up working out pretty well. So you could do the same thing, or you could just have like a regular interval if it's like super popular, or if it's super accessed a lot. And then in addition to that, you can make the cache time part of the data that you send to the front end. And so then the data can, the UI can say, this is the or this is the latest data as of, this time or whatever, and then have like a little thing that you can say, no, I want to get the latest stuff. And now they're sitting there waiting for 30 seconds. And you could do that with UseFetcher. Yeah, so they're sitting there waiting for 30 seconds, but they asked for that. And so that's what I would do. Just have a cache there that's maybe regularly updated, or just updated as the users are accessing it. You always serve them the old version, and then you have a little thing that says, no, I want to get the latest as of right now. And then you just give them the any version that comes after they click the button. And so like, even if maybe you have a request that's in flight that's going to update the cache, and while it's in flight, they hit the refresh button, then like you serve them the one that came from that, you serve them the latest version of the cache basically. And so if the latest version of the cache is the version they have, then you just wait for the next one. If the latest version of the cache is newer than the one they have, you just serve that one immediately. And so sometimes it will take, sometimes it'll be immediate, sometimes it'll take maybe the full 30 seconds, but anywhere in between there. That I think would lead to the best user experience possible with that sort of an API setup. Yeah, so there are some things that you can't cache because it's so dynamic that it wouldn't make any sense. You'd basically replicate the entire system in the cache. There are not a lot of cases like that, I think, but like especially if you're at that scale, then you probably are at a scale where it would make sense to just cache a lot anyway. But yeah, in that situation, if you really were stuck and you're like, no, you already said that you can cache, but if you were so stuck that you can't cache it at all, then yeah, you totally, with Remix, you would just say, don't put that in the loader, put it in UseFetcher. And then on the client, you say UseFetcher load inside of a use effect. And then you just start giving the user spinners, which of course is not good. But I mean, if that's the best you can do, like I said, there are not very many use cases where you can't put a cache in front of it and make the user experience better. And if you're concerned about users saying, hey, this is stale data, you just show them the time that it was created and given them a mechanism for updating it. And then just, you have a little inline spinner, but at least they can see some data that, like some data, even if stale, is better than a spinner. That's the principle there. So yeah, good luck. I think that you're right. Your initial thought, putting the fetch for the 30 seconds in loader will not work. Don't do that. I mean, it will work, but don't do it. You need to have a cache in front of that 30-second response. Okay, that was a long answer to your question, but hopefully it was thorough. And yeah, it looks like that's all the questions, which actually works out because I've got a bunch of stuff to do. But if there are any other questions, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer to see. While I'm waiting, I'm going to take a look at this message I just got. Okay, well, it looks like there are no other questions. That one was at least a pretty interesting one. There are probably a bunch of people who are waiting for my regular scheduled time to ask questions, so sorry about that. That's totally my bad. I just, I need to, so what happened was when I joined Remix, I switched from using an egghead Zoom link to, well, actually, it's not just joining Remix. Actually, Zoom only lets you schedule 50 weeks on recurring meetings. For some weird reason. And so when my 50 weeks was up, the calendar event that I had associated to that Zoom meeting stopped. And so it's not on my calendar. And I just figured that out today. I was like, why is this happening? It's because of that. And so I just need to make a new calendar event that's not associated to the Zoom meeting so I don't have this problem in the future. So I will not have this problem in the future. I will not be here next week though. So yeah, February 4th, I will not be here. I'll be here the week after that, and then I will be gone the week after that. So yeah, that is that. Okay, sweet. Bodhi, if I'm saying that wrong, I apologize. How does caching work? Okay, so I can talk about this for a sec. So in the example above here, where we're talking about this API call that takes 30 seconds to respond, it can be for any reason. What you can do is you can say, okay, go get that, bring it back. Boy, that's taking too long. So I'm going to put a little bit of code or a database. Redis is a very common one for caching. That's what I use. A Redis database in front of that API call. So instead of calling that API, I will say, hey, cache implementation, Redis or whatever. Do you have this value? Or basically, let me think about this or explain this differently. You know what? It might actually be easier for me to show you because I just gave this talk yesterday. Slides here we go. Yeah, gave this talk just yesterday at a conference called Agent Conf. And here we go. Okay. Why am I editing? Hold on a second. Let's go to the actual slides. I don't need to edit. There we go. Okay. So here's my code from my repo. So I have this Cachified function. And this is the code that takes a really long time to run. So it can be anything, any async thing where here I'm downloading a file and then I parse it as YAML and then I return it. So let's assume that this download file function takes a really long time. So it's just like, wow, that takes a long time. It doesn't, it's like we're downloading from GitHub. It takes maybe 300 milliseconds or less. But it can, and some of my blog posts end up downloading a bunch of files. And so, yeah, so let's just pretend that this is the 30-second thing. It's just taking too long. And so what we do is we say, hey, Cachified, I want you to use the Redis cache. And this is just a server. And so Cachified is responsible for saying, hey, Redis cache, do you have this value? Here's what it's called. Do you have a value in there by this key? And Cachified will say, or Redis will say, no, I actually don't. So Cachified's like, fine, that's no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and call this get fresh value function to go get what that value should be. So that value will be retrieved from the database or from wherever, the slow network thing, whatever it is, that value will be retrieved. In my case, I'm mapping, I'm getting an array of people for the credits page. And then before giving it back, it will say, okay, hey, Redis cache, here is a value that I want you to stick in your database at this key. And so Redis cache is like, cool, that's mine now. I've got it. And then we send it back to whoever's calling it. So now I have all people and I can continue on my way. So then the next time somebody comes around and says, hey, I need to get all the people for the credits, then Cachified says, hey, Redis, do you have a value for this key? And Redis is like, oh yeah, you gave it to me earlier. Here it is. And so now Cachified doesn't have to call get fresh value. Now Cachified is just like, oh, sweet. Let's just skip the whole really slow thing. And I'll just hand that back to them. I just got it from the Redis cache. And the Redis cache retrieval takes like 5 milliseconds or less on my site for like any value that I'm getting. So it's really quite fast versus 30 seconds. So, and again, that's not how long this takes, but 300 milliseconds or less or something like that is too long for my page loads. So that's why we have Cachified there. So anyway, we keep on doing that. So I say, hey, I want all the people, and Cachified's like, sweet, Redis cache has got it. Here it is. And that happens really fast. Well, at some point, this is why caching is such a hard problem. At some point, you're like, hey, the value that's in the cache is wrong. It's not the latest value. So like it can fall out of date because you have two sources of truth, right? A cache is a second place to store the truth. And when that, like anybody who's been doing programming for a while knows that can be a problematic situation when you have two sources of truth. So what you do is you say, let's try to keep these two things in sync. So caching is not something you want to do for everything because of this problem, because the cache can fall out of date and now you have something that's out of sync. But when it's merited when you need something to be a lot faster. And so what we do is we say, hey, anytime I update the credits YAML file, let me tell the server that, hey, that value is updated and force a refresh. So that's why I have this force fresh option where I say, when that is set to true, then Cachified is like, oh, you want to force a fresh value here. That's fine. So I'm not even going to bother asking the Redis cache if it's in there. I'm just going to go ahead and get the fresh value, and then I'll update the Redis cache value there. So that's one way. So whenever I update the credits YAML file, this gets updated automatically. I have a GitHub action that goes ahead and does all of that. It's relatively simple. So then the other thing is sometimes it could get updated and like the content itself could get updated and like something was broken with the GitHub action or something. And so it could fall out of date over time. And so that's why I have this max age. This is optional. But what this will do is it stores the time or in Redis along with the value that is created here from get fresh value. I also store the time that the cache value was created. And so then every time Cachified is called, it's going to compare the time that the Redis cache value was created with the max age value and say, hey, is this older than the max age? So is it beyond the, is its age greater than the max age? And if it is, then what I do is I say, that's fine, still give them the cached value. But after you're done giving them the cache value, go ahead and update the cached value. So on my site, nobody ever is waiting for the actual fresh value. They're always getting a cached value because that's the trade-off that I decided to make. One thing that I'll probably add to Cachified eventually, like if I were to ever open source it, I mean, it's open source. You can go take a look at it on my website repo. But if I were to ever like package it up, one other feature I would add is a stale while revalidate time, which means that I'm okay. Like, so if it's being read and it comes back and it says, hey, it's older than the max age, then I would say, okay, how much older is it? Is it like a day older or is it like 30 days older? If it's a day older, that's fine. But anything older than a day, I actually want to force the user to wait for the fresh stuff. So that's what stale while revalidate means. And that's a browser specification for shared caches and stuff. Or I don't know, it's a web standard, I think, not browser thing. It's a CDN thing. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of what caching is. It's just this really fast thing that sits between you and the actual fresh value. So long answer to your simple question, but hopefully that was helpful. Okay, is it a good idea to do something like this? We got loader is loading, error, and here's our content. Our application code base has multiple places where we have conditional rendering. The content part can be long sometimes. Would going with the first approach introduce some unforeseen behavior? Yeah, I know. Sorry, I just got distracted. Michal, I thought that I updated the, yeah, there it is. See, I have the updated version. Is there somewhere that I didn't update it? Because I did look at that. Yep, there it is, updated version. Did I miss it somewhere? If I did, let me know. Yeah, so hey there, or hater. Yeah, this is like a pretty common thing. The content part can be long sometimes. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. Yeah, so the loader component would just say, if is loading, then render the spinner, otherwise render the children. The error component would say, if there's an error, render the error thing, otherwise render the children. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that looks way simpler. Yeah, so what I would say though is for your error component, use React error boundary. That's kind of like a pretty solid way to manage that, but maybe, yeah, look into it. This might be fine as it is. Yeah, that looks fine. You should also look into Remix, because you won't have these problems in Remix. Your loading states happen somewhere else, error states happen somewhere else, and you can just, your happy path stays happy. So yeah. I think I do actually have two versions of this talk. There's one that's the full version and one that is the version that can fit within 30 minutes. That's, yeah, probably, yeah, this one. So I may have not updated this one. Yeah, I didn't update this one. Here, I can update it right now. Replace with this and uncrop. And we'll go over here. It's pretty quick and easy. Replace with this one and crop. Great, there we go. Saved, thanks. Okay, yeah, good luck. I think you'll love Remix. It's awesome. Is there a way to use Cachified with local storage? Yeah, totally. So here, I'll just show you the Cachified implementation right now, and I'll link you to it. Cache.server. So this is my Cachified implementation. And yeah, so it's like 250 lines of code that has evolved, that's for sure. This part is kind of interesting. This is how we trigger refreshing the cache if we're over time, like if it's gone past the max age. But I do it in a way that makes sure that we can finish processing the request so that us refreshing the cache doesn't slow down the request. By setting it to timeout after 200 milliseconds. So just like, hopefully while the server's not busy or something. Probably should have measured that. But anyway, okay, yeah. So all that Cachified needs is a cache, and a cache object should have a name. That's just for logs. It should have a get and a set that can be async. The get should give you a promise. Or actually, it doesn't have to be async. That's what this VNUP means. So it's a value or null or undefined, or a promise that is the value that resolves to the value null or undefined. So it doesn't have to be async either. But anyway, the get receives a string. Let me bump that up a little bit because we're on 720p, for goodness sake. So yeah, get accepts a key, and it has to return a VNUP. So it returns the metadata, which is this cache metadata, just the created time and the max age, and the value. So that's what it's supposed to return, is metadata and value. The set, and that actually is easy. You don't have to really implement any of that, because the set takes care of setting the value properly. So the set takes a key, and the value is the metadata and value. And then the promise resolves to, or it returns unknown, or a promise that resolves to unknown. We don't actually care what it is. You can return nothing because we don't use the return value. And then you also need to return a delete. So yeah, you could use this with local storage. You could use it with IndexedDB. You could use it with like even Postgres if you wanted to, which is not necessarily fast. I actually put Cachified in front of a couple Postgres calls. Well, in particular, Postgres is pretty fast, and lots of my Postgres calls are not going to do this. But for my blog stuff, I've got the calculate. Well, so there's a blog recommendations. I don't think I cachify any of that. Maybe I do some of it. Yeah, so get most popular blogs, most popular post slugs. That's cachified. Max age of 60 seconds. So every minute we get the most popular posts. We get the total read posts. This one is kind of tricky right here. Yeah, we're doing some raw Prisma queries right there because I can't figure out a good way to do this in one query without query raw, and I didn't want to do multiple queries. Actually, technically, I am doing multiple queries, but anyway, yeah, I couldn't figure out how to do this with Prisma APIs. Yeah, so this one, get blog read rankings. This one is tricky because it takes it forces it, there's probably a way to do this, and if you know SQL really well, then maybe you can fix this. But right now, it requires 9 queries. So yeah, because we have 3 teams and there are like three queries that we need to make. So one, we need to get how many post reads by a particular team. So we're on a post. We need to know how many people on team red have read this post. We'll say blue to remove ambiguity there. So team blue have read this post. And then we see how many active members there are on that team. And then we see how many reads are recent. So within the last like 6 months or something. Each one of those is a Prisma Postgres query. And then we do this for all 3 teams. So we've got 9 queries anytime you want to get the blog read rankings. And so that's like, that's for each blog post. So anytime somebody opened a blog post, I'd have to make 9 queries to my database to be able to calculate what this should say. So yeah, that is cached 100%. So anyway, yeah, long answer to your question, you could totally use this with local storage if you wanted to. Okay, if you are starting, and I would not, I guess I should say, I would probably not recommend doing this. Unless, yeah, just use a backend. Have a backend. Yeah. Okay. If you're starting a new React project today, what is your choice for state management writing CSS? State management, I don't manage state because I use Remix. So use Remix, and then you don't need to worry about state management. The only state management you need to worry about is component state management for your reusable components, and that's just React. You're just using use reducer, use state, whatever. For writing CSS, I use Tailwind and I love it. So that's what that's my choice. If I were starting a new React project today, Remix and Tailwind, and I'd be off to the races. Reach UI also. I pretty much use Reach UI in like every project that I use now. Okay, greetings. I've got a React app paired with multiple GraphQL endpoints on the back end, one for querying and one for subscriptions. I was using Apollo provider for passing down GraphQL client for components when there was a single GraphQL endpoint. But in the case of multiple endpoints, I have to change endpoint URI in order to use subscriptions. Is there a way to dynamically change URI for GraphQL client, or maybe some kind of separate nested provider for subscription purposes only? I don't know. I don't use GraphQL, and I have not used Apollo provider ever. I have used GraphQL before, but never have I used Apollo provider. This is a good question for the Apollo support channels, like maybe they have a Discord or a Slack or something. I would ask that there. Sorry, I can't really help you there. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to wrap things up. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Sorry that this was a little bit earlier than usual. Like I said, next week I am out, but I'll be back the week after that. So feel free to fill up this Discord with your questions. I'm going to stall until Haiti finishes typing what they are typing. And yes, almost there, still typing. Somebody sent a message in the Zoom chat. Let me take a look at that. Yeah, you're welcome. Since I'm gonna be gone for the next week, I really wanted to answer whatever question they were about to ask, but now it's gone. So I guess that's it. Thanks everybody. We will see you in the future, and I hope you have an awesome day. Bye. Oh, there it is. Okay. Can I ask anything, or is there topics I should follow? Anything? I can't. Whoa, what was that? Can't promise that I'll be very useful for every question, though. Anton's question. Well, yeah, Anton's question is a case in point. Okay, well, I've got to run, and Haiti is not okay. Johan, sorry, is typing. Come on, I gotta run soon, so I'm going to jump off at 9:15 for sure. Okay, how did you render your Markdown files in your remix documentation site? Okay, so that one is a little tricky. We're using a package called Ryan Florence /MD. And this is private. It's not open source because Ryan is not prepared to help people with it because he's got a lot of things to do. But if you want to look at what's inside, you can always go to unpackage Ryan Florence /MD, and that will take you to the compiled dist folder. You can look at this, and there's everything that's inside. So unpackage will show you how to do all, or like what's inside, and you can reference this for your own stuff if you want to. Yeah, so on my site, he actually gave me access to this, and I forked it for what I'm doing on my site. I just changed a couple of things. So if you wanted to, I think I've got Kenzie Dodd's MD temp. And mine is also not open source because I also don't have time to work on it. But yeah, I like mine better, which is why I made it. But you can look at mine. It's a lot of it is pretty much the same to what Ryan's got. Yeah, it's a little bit shorter, I think. But yeah, still like lots of the same sort of thing. We've got all the languages there. Just the primary thing is that we are using a package called Shrieky for our syntax highlighting. Shrieky Markdown. What is that what it's called? Maybe it's called something else. Hold on a second. Let's find out. Oh, Seeky, not Shrieky. Seeky or Shiki, not Shrieky. It's Shiki. But yeah, so it's a great highlighter. And yeah, pretty cool. And so then we use that to yeah, to parse highlights and do a bunch of other things. It's pretty cool. So yeah, feel free to take a look at that and build something off of that. I just neither Ryan or I have time to maintain anything. That's why it's not open source. Yeah, as far as like, so actually something that might be more helpful. So that's like parsing the Markdown, turning it into HTML. We do the HTML or convert it straight into HTML on the remix docs. On mine, I am actually using MDX, and I do have something that's open source for that. I use MDX Bundler, which I open sourced because it is quite helpful. So you can take a look at MDX Bundler. I guess I should share this also, so you can take a look at that if that is helpful to you at all. But MDX Bundler works out really nicely, and I'm definitely caching all of this stuff. So on my site, I have a function that is responsible for downloading files from GitHub. And then after I download the files, I will pipe it through MDX bundler. And then I have a cache for all of that. So it caches all that. So I don't have to do that every time. Because if I did, my blog post would take an extra 500 milliseconds to load. As it is, they take like 5 milliseconds to pull from the Redis cache or less. So yeah, you'll want to look into MDX bundler. It's pretty sweet. Okay, Johan is saying weirdest bug, can't find solution. Posted in React. Let's take a look. Is there a GitHub action to generate docs? So we have a GitHub action that refreshes the cache that we have on the Remix docs. And the Remix website is not open source. My website is, and I do have a GitHub action that runs anytime I make a change. So if we look at actions here, then you'll see I have this refresh content. It takes 5 seconds to get this updated. And most of it is spent doing like other stuff. So yeah, I just detect what changed since the last time we refreshed the cache and go tell it, go tell the server that those things changed and to refresh the cache. It's pretty cool. And you can take a look. That's all open source. So you can look at the workflow file and stuff. It's pretty simple. Most of it actually is in this refresh content change thing. So yeah, that's that. Yeah, so let's take a look at this, Johan. Weirdest bug with React Children map and live reload. Yeah, live reload. Do you mean like fast refresh? Or because live reload means reload the browser. You shouldn't have any trouble with that. But if you're using fast refresh, I basically never trust fast refresh. I never liked hot module replacement. It always seemed to not work. I don't mind it in an isolated environment like a Storybook or something, but yeah, in my app, I basically never trust it. But anyway, yeah, okay. So the problem is what's happening here is you're saying if it equals step. Well, when you do a live reload, that step function is still in memory, but you have a brand new step function. And so now the item.type is the brand new step function, and you're still comparing it to the old step function. This is part of the problem with live reload. You cannot sidestep this problem. So what you can do though is you can add like a property to your step component that's like an ID, or you could call it, you could just say a display name, because then the React DevTools will make it nice. So you could say display name equals full screen stepper.step as a string. And then instead of item.type is equal to step, you would say item.type.display name is equal to that string. And that would help you avoid this problem with live reload. Yeah, super annoying, but that's what you have to do when you're doing weird stuff. It's fast refresh. Yeah, and it is in Storybook. Yeah, that's the place where I think it's kind of useful. So yeah, your best bet is to just give it a primitive value to compare it to, rather than an object or a function in this case. Okay, now I really do have to go. Thanks everybody for coming. This was fun. We were able to get some really interesting questions and answers, despite me starting all that early and stuff. So glad that made sense. Normally that sort of thing is best explained when I'm typing some examples and stuff, but glad you grabbed that. That's it for me. Hope you all have a marvelous day.